Atlin, British Columbia, and gold are synonymous. Gold is the reason for Atlin's existence. It was discovered on Pine Creek in the winter of 1898. By July of that same year, the rumors had spread, and so the stampeders rushed to register their claims with the Northwest Mounted Police at Tagish Lake. The Klondike gold rush was at its height, so there were thousands of would-be miners on the Chilkoot Trail and sailing down the lakes and rivers which led to Dawson City. Many of these people were delighted to hear of a new discovery closer at hand. The real rush to Atlin did not take place until the winter and spring of 1899. It was from Log Cabin on the Chilkoot Trail that those bound for Atlin followed the difficult Fantail Trail. Atlin in the spring of 1899. It was nothing more than a tent town. The large building in the background was the Grand Hotel, a first-class establishment with a ballroom, excellent dining room, and first-class accommodation. As permanence became more assured, larger buildings were built, such as the Bank of Commerce, which did not at first have the most secure accommodations. By 1899, the town had 3 banks, a federal building with a post office and telegraph office, and businesses grew by the dozens. Hotels such as this sprang up almost overnight. In the 1920s, the first Atlin Inn catered to as many as 10,000 tourists a year. The final symbol of Atlin's permanence was the provincial government building and courthouse, built in 1900. The British America Company's warehouse supplied liquor to most of the hotels. It was here that the fire of 1901 began, and among the most valuable items lost were 40 cases of the very best French champagne. Atlin also had a prosperous brewery. It had contracts to supply many of the lake vessels and riverboats operating in the north. After the first couple of years, the individual miner gave way to the interests of larger mining companies. A more established society appeared, and a symbol of that was the Atlin Club, situated on the lakefront. It was in most respects a typical gentleman's club of the era. It boasted a grand piano, a French chef, and a well-furnished library. It also had an elegant ballroom, and the ladies were frequently invited. By about 1907, the size of Atlin had diminished. Many individual miners and a number of companies were still working, but the boom days were over. Established at the same time as Atlin was the town of Discovery, or Pine City as it was first known. While Atlin was the point of arrival and departure for the boats and the service center for the area, Discovery was where the miners lived and worked. In 1899, it had a population of 7,000 or 8,000 and was probably much larger than Atlin. It did eventually attract hotel keepers, merchants, and other businessmen. The Pine Tree Hotel was probably the largest and certainly the longest operating establishment in Discovery. After the days of the individual miner in Atlin were over, hydraulic mining became common. Huge monitors washed down the banks of the creeks to reveal their hidden riches. On Pine Creek, there were as many as 14 large monitors working along a mile of creek bed. Among the other methods used were steam shovels. These monsters burned as many as 6 cords of wood a day, all of it cut by hand. Dredging for gold had been extremely successful in the Klondike, but because of the large boulders in this area, it was an expensive failure. In later years, large cranes were brought across the winter ice. And some mining was done underground. It was especially successful in the wintertime. One of the richest claims in the area was at Nugget Point, near Discovery. A 29-ounce nugget found on Pine Creek in 1900. At that time, it was worth $470. Often, the women became involved in mining. Jenny Bender worked her claim on Boulder Creek until she was well over 80. During the gold rush, the area was policed by the British Columbia Provincial Police Force. Atlin was an orderly camp, and there was not a great deal of crime. The major problem seems to have been illegal gambling in the hotels and saloons. And the stagecoach, which ran between Atlin and Discovery, was robbed once, but the robber not only found no gold, but he was soon arrested for his trouble. Atlin's first school was opened in 1899, and for 3 years, classes were held in a tent with a sawdust floor. It was 1902 before parents could persuade the government to build a classroom. And this building, which now houses our museum, was used as a classroom until 1968. The road into Atlin was not built until 1949, and until that time, all passengers and freight arrived via Skagway, Alaska. Once the White Pass Railway was completed in 1900, it was possible to travel by train as far as Carcross, and there switch to a lake boat, which would travel on Tagish Lake as far as Taku Landing. And there, passengers would transfer onto another train known as the Taku Tram. This would carry them a distance of 2 1/4 miles to the eastern shore of Atlin Lake. During the gold rush, the Taku Tram was known as the shortest and the most expensive railway in the world. The fare? $2. The train was met at Scotia Bay on Atlin Lake by another lake vessel. For more than 20 years, that was the MV Taran, which still sits on the shore in front of the town. It was built locally in 1917, but by 1926, the tourist business was so great that it was necessary to stretch her out, so they added a piece in the middle. During the winter months, a horse and sled pulled passengers, freight, and mail across the frozen lakes. Before the automobile came along, transportation around town and between Atlin and Discovery was by horse and wagon. I say horse and wagon. The first automobile in the entire North was driven across the lake by Count E.J. Delamere. In fact, he brought 2 vehicles. One was an automobile and the other a 3-wheeled motorcycle. And the bicycle was another popular conveyance. This lady had pedaled hers in Discovery. Winter freight was brought in by cat train. The first aircraft in Atlin was in 1929 when the Queen of the Yukon landed on the lake ice. She was a sister ship to the Spirit of St. Louis. Atlin's tourist industry began to prosper during World War I, when European travel was no longer practical. So the wealthy flocked to Atlin, the Yukon, and Alaska. In 1916, the White Pass and Yukon route built the Atlin Inn to accommodate visitors. A fleet of Buicks sat ready to carry tourists to view the gold diggings and to see the sights in and around Atlin. Those were the good old days in Atlin. Like the Klondike, part of Atlin's charm is its history. And it's a history which is very much alive today. As well, this Switzerland of the North nestles in the beauty of northern British Columbia's most picturesque setting. Atlin is fast becoming an important destination for today's travelers. And the Atlin Visitors Association, her people, and her expanding visitor accommodations and facilities are preparing to meet the demands of a bright future in tourism.